Story. Yemi was so happy when I came home with the baby. At last, we had our own. After praying for 6 years for a child, I saw the joy on his face, and I knew if he found out the truth, it would kill him. I knew before we got married that I couldn't bear kids of my own, but I loved Yemi so much. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him, so I kept it to myself. It wasn't my fault after all. It happened when I was in the university. I had gone out with some friends to read all night. There was no light and the mosquitoes were a lot, so I decided to go back to the hostel. The girls told me to wait a while, maybe the light would come, but I couldn't and I was just too restless. I decided to go back alone. The distance from my faculty to my hostel wasn't so far, but I decided to take a shortcut through the bushes to save time. I heard the sound of someone coming towards me. I thought it must be another student. I kept on walking, even though I was scared. By the time I got closer to the sound of the person, I heard a voice telling me to stop, but instead I kept walking faster. From nowhere, I felt a hand hold me still. I was pulling and struggling to free myself when I felt a hard slap on my face. I was crying and begging, but all of it fell on deaf ears as he tore off my clothes and had his way with me. I cried myself to my hostel. I was bleeding as it was my first time. I got to the hostel, cleaned up myself, and made sure not to tell anyone. I was so afraid of the stigma of being tagged a rape victim. Plus, people had always seen me as one innocent girl. Now that I was no longer a virgin, I didn't want to be seen as a wayward person. I never told my parents or even my best friends. I kept it all to myself until I started throwing up. I went to the hospital for checkup. I was told I was 9 weeks pregnant. I fainted, but I was quickly revived. I knew of a girl in my department who had gotten an abortion. The news was everywhere and she almost dropped out of school if not for the help of our HOD, who encouraged her to stay. I went to her in the disguise of being a friend, but my intention was to know where she had done the operation. Once I got the address from her, telling her I needed it for a friend, I went there to inquire. I used up my savings to pay for the operation. Few days later, I was bleeding profusely. My mom and dad had to come to school to get me. They rushed me to a hospital where it was confirmed I had undergone an abortion and it was shabbily done. The doctor told my parents I had lost a lot of blood and if they were to carry out any further operation, it would cost me my womb. They had no choice. They agreed to the operation and I was left without a womb. I cried for several weeks. My parents did not believe me when I told them the truth. They sent me to the village to stay with an aunt who was a midwife. They sent her money for my upkeep, but that was all. I was a lost child to them. I dropped out of school and learned to sew. I made some money, then I moved to the city. I cut ties with my parents and moved on with my life. I was determined to make it at all costs. I got a major contract with a company that opened doors for me. I started whining and dining with people at the top of different walks of life. I met Yemi at a luncheon organized by a top entertainment brand. I was their fashion stylist. We got to know each other, and even though I told him I wasn't interested in marriage, he managed to get me hooked. Once I fell, I knew there was no going back. We got married. I told Yemi I was an orphan, so I had no family to stand for me at my wedding, except for an aunt who lived in the village. This brought us even closer as his family embraced me. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and no child. I wasn't getting the same treatment from his family as before. I knew I had to do something, so I went back to the village, told my aunt about what I was facing. She told me she would help me out. See, my aunt was a retired midwife at the village hospital, so she had her ways. She told me when to comfort the baby, that she had spoken to a young girl who was giving her child up for adoption. I was so happy. Found a way to stay in the village throughout the duration of the pregnancy, only going to the city when I had to. I made sure Yemi never saw me naked during this period, as I was fully disguised as a pregnant woman. When the baby was born, she was handed to me. I loved her the moment I saw her. My aunt told me the mother was raped and didn't want to keep the child. I was moved to tears. It was like the world was toying with me. To think that I aborted my child because I was raped, but here I was with the child of someone else who was a product of rape. What an irony. Yemi was so happy that finally he had a child of his own. I was so happy that I could give him a child. For me, that was all that mattered.